I don't speak Japanese. We don't really know that much family in Japan because of this country's history. I'm not necessarily proud of the U.S. government either. So I've always kind of claimed LA as my identity. I always wanted to make films as a tool for social activism, kind of like my parents. A lot of people, first thing they tell me is that they cried throughout the film. Hi, my name is Tadashi Nakamura. I'm the director of Third Act, and we're here at Sundance with Sucharita.
I am still at the Sundance International Film Festival, and I'm here right now with Tadashi Nakamura. Hi, Tad.
Hi.
Congratulations on Third Act. What a wonderful documentary you've made.
Oh, thank you so much.
Now, for those unfamiliar, your father, Robert Nakamura, is a legend, and he's known as a pioneer in the field that he works in, which is telling the stories of lots of Japanese Americans in America and everything that they've had to go through. Do you remember how old you were when you realized how big deal your father is? How much of a big deal he is?
I think I was probably around eight or nine. There was a film called Claiming a Voice, which Arthur Dong directed, which was on visual communications. And I think up until that point, I was around, but probably not old enough to realize, exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I saw that film that I kind of realized he was a big deal. And then I kind of, after that, would notice people coming up to him and people referring to him as the godfather of Asian American media. And especially as a professor at UCLA, we'd always run into former students and things like that.
I am a new immigrant in America. I've just come here from Bombay, and so much of your film resonated with me, especially when your father speaks about when he was young and he wondered whether he should assimilate and how he should assimilate because he looks different, his culture is different. So the film really sort of hit me. But you are American, born and raised. Was there a time in your life when you decided to sort of start looking back at your culture and decided to be a filmmaker that would tell the stories of the culture that you come from?
Yeah, I think identity is still, it's still kind of a struggle here in America. So I'm fourth generation Japanese American. My dad was born and raised here. I was born and raised here, and specifically in LA. And so for us, I don't speak Japanese. We don't really know that much family in Japan. So at the same time, I think because of this country's history, I'm not necessarily proud of the U.S. government either. So I've always kind of claimed LA as my identity. And through that, it's been kind of a journey because for me, I've always identified as Asian American or Japanese American, but even defining what that is, is very fluid, is ever evolving. So, as a kid, I was very much into hip hop, into black culture, sports, which is also, for me, it was black culture. So similar to my dad, I think trying to figure out what Japanese American means, what that is. But luckily, I'm part of a very strong Japanese American community in LA, in the Little Tokyo community. So I've had grounding. I've basically, because my dad didn't grow up in a community, he made sure that me and my sister grew up in a very strong community and has a strong sense of community. But even that, I think at first I wanted to, my goal was to play football in college and hopefully go
your
to the
father's
NFL.
like, I'm surprised you want to be a filmmaker.
Yeah,
You're such a jock.
Yeah. So I think my entry actually was Asian American Studies, was a big part of becoming a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to make films as a tool for social activism, kind of like my parents. And that helped, define not only my own identity, but what role I could play in the community.
And it's so important to have filmmakers like you and your father, because where I come from, India, from the other side of the world, you hear stories about World War II and the Axis powers and the Allied powers and everything, but you don't really hear what happened after Pearl Harbor to Japanese Americans living in America. There's very few storytellers who will tell you that story, and that makes the work that you do and your father did so much more important. But I also realize that it's important for you to involve your children in all of this, and they're very young. How old are your kids now?
My daughter's 4 and my son is 8 now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and we see your daughter being born in this film. It's adorable. But it's so important for you to involve your children, not just in the history of where your family comes from, but also the current political environment of America. Why is that?
Well, I think, at least for our family, I think the political is personal.
Indeed.
I think the emotions that evoked, I think learning about the camps is one thing on an intellectual level. Learning about institutional racism, learning about the past. But once you put it in context to, that happened to your grandfather, that happened to your mother, your grandmother, and that will happen to your kids, it becomes very personal. And I think for me, my parents have always, for them, their social activism, their art, their careers, their film careers, and their regular lives have always been intertwined. You can't really separate them, and I'm probably similar in that sense of, we come from a filmmaking background or family, and it only made sense to. Well, I think specifically in this film, we really wanted to talk about 4 generations of my family.
Right.
So it's not only including, my grandfather, my dad, and myself, but as well as my son.
There's one of the most celebrated documentary filmmakers in India, Anand Patwardhan, who made a film 2 years ago that premiered at the Toronto Film Festival called The World is Family. And in that, he also takes a camera to his aging parents, who were a part of the Indian Revolution when we were fighting for our independence from the British in the 40s. So around the same time when your father's story is set. I found lots of parallels. So if you get the opportunity to watch that film, it's called The World is Family. It's such a phenomenal documentary as
we'll
well.
Definitely check that out.
But does it make easier as a filmmaker to point a camera towards your parents and record their stories, thinking of them as characters in a story that you're putting together?
It was, I think that, once my father got diagnosed with Parkinson's, once his, health really started to decline, it was easier for me actually to escape into the film and to approach talking to my dad as a director versus a son.
Yeah.
It was easier emotionally to see him and myself as these 2 characters that are struggling with this issue, rather than accepting it as reality that it's actually happened to me. So I definitely think, in the beginning it was easier for me to almost escape emotionally into the film instead of really dealing with my own emotions and thoughts about what's really going on.
Yeah, there's so many layers running through this film. Of course, your father's experience as a Japanese American man, as a filmmaker. There's also a beautiful love story between your parents that you talk about and raising children in modern day America. And what is the response you've received at Sundance so far?
It's been great. I think a lot of people, first thing they tell me is that they cried throughout the film, which I mean, at least that means that it touched them in some way, and they're able to connect to it. So it's been a great response so far. We had a big world premiere a couple days ago, sold out audience,
Amazing.
and I think the great part of that was my dad was able to be there, as well as with all his grandkids. So it was a moment that it was really a dream come true. That specific moment of being here, being with the family, and having my dad by my side was something very special.
So special. We get a brief glimpse at your tattoos as well. So whoever's watching third act at some point, please look out for that. Great shot. One of my favorite places to go in America as a new person who's just moved here is the Ellis Island Immigration Museum. Have you been there?
Yes, I have.
It's really incredible, all the stories that are preserved. And it also helps me contextualize the country to a huge extent. Right now, it's so important for these stories to be told. Thank you for being one of the voices who's choosing to tell these stories, and congratulations on making it to Sundance, Mr. Nakamura.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you.